I'm an academic, I'm an actor, I'm a director, but primarily now what I do is I direct Shakespeare and I workshop and lecture on Shakespeare. So a lot of what I'm going to talk about is sort of an approach to thinking about how best to get it across in class, I think, because I don't know what it's, well, I do know what it's like here, I don't know why I say that. I know exactly what it's like here, but in the UK, teaching of Shakespeare, when I was growing up, was pretty brutal. As a way of turning kids off Shakespeare, where we're pretty past masters at it. And I'm generally, and not just educationally, a firm believer that we've spent 400 years making Shakespeare difficult. And I think we've done it really, really well. And you see kids, as Brian said, I work a lot at the Globe. You see kids on the Globe stage, and they're sort of 8 or 9, and they're having a whale of a time. And they're wandering around shouting, Tybalt, you rat catcher, will you walk, and biting their thumbs at each other. And you know that someone's going to get them into a classroom and go, iambic pentameter at them, and that it's going to put them off for life. I think something I've discovered from working at the Globe and working for companies around the world is that the easiest way to excite kids, students of any age, our age, your age, their age, is really to take it back to basics, get away from the academic approach to it, and think about the practical approach. It's what the speaker last night was talking about. Get them to memorize lines, get them to memorize sonnets. I've just come from Memphis, where we've been doing exactly that in a class at Rhodes College. We've been getting students to memorize a sonnet each, and quite a lot of the students had never memorized anything before. I hugely agree with that. Nothing beats getting it up on its feet, nothing beats playing around with it, especially when you start, I think, looking at the way they did it. And I've sort of become a bit of an expert on original practice. Well, I'm not an expert, a bit of a devotee, if you like, of original practice, of how they did it then. It's not how I think we need to do it now. I love lights, costume, revolve, etc., 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 as much as the next man. But working at the Globe, you start to realize what that theatre tells us about the plays. But working just thinking about the way they work, I've discovered is a really good entrance module, if you like, for students. It's a really good way of getting them interested. I was working at a school in Memphis called Libertas with students of about 8 or 9, who I normally don't touch with a barge pole because they scare the hell out of me. But the professor I was working for at Rhodes, kids go there, so there I was. And in fact, quite a few of the teachers from there are here at this conference. And it was great, because you're talking about Shakespeare to 8 and 9-year-olds who've not done any Shakespeare, who are terrified of it, and not coming from backgrounds where they've got any literary sort of support. And they were up and doing it, and it was sort of a riot, and it was great. And you thought, yeah, okay, this sort of works. And it's to do with thinking about how they did the plays in the 1590s, because we sort of work on the principle, I think, that theatre is theatre is theatre, and that we do plays and they did plays, and plays are plays are plays. But they're really not. So I want to start by just thinking quickly about the way they put on plays in 1590s, 1600s London. Because, and I'm going to assume, patronizingly enough, as you're all teachers, that you all know the story of Romeo and Juliet, which I'm sure you do. If we're doing it now, fairly obviously, you start by going through you start by casting it. Then you go through a process of rehearsal, fairly obviously, and in England, that's normally about 6 weeks. If you're working for a smaller company, it's less. As Brad said, I worked at the Folger several times. The Folger give you 4.5 weeks to rehearse a Shakespeare, which is fine. You can do Shakespeare in 4.5 weeks. If you work in Germany, we have a company involved in the Globe called the Bremer. If you work in Germany, you get about 6 months to rehearse your Shakespeare play. They were up in arms some years ago because their rehearsals were cut to 5 months and they didn't think they'd get the play on. And it begs really the most obvious question, and this is interactive, this talk, so these are not rhetorical questions. It begs the most obvious question, which is, why don't we get longer? Why don't we get longer to rehearse? Why don't we get longer? Why do you keep rehearsal short?
Is it to keep putting on more plays, bringing in more people into the theaters?
And therefore,
More money?
there we go. The first thing to do is ditch the idea of art, culture, drama, and all those other words that start with a capital letter, and think cash. Show business is a business. You keep rehearsal short, you get the play on quicker, as you say, you start putting an audience in, you start selling seats, you start making money. Germany has fantastic state subsidy for the arts. So whatever it is they do for 6 months, basically the government pay. In this country, art is a swear word. You don't get that level of subsidy in my country, and in yours. So you keep rehearsal short, you get the play on quicker, you start making money. The same is true in Shakespeare's time, and this is the first thing to I think, really get kids more interested. It's not about the art and the drama and the what it all means. It's about money. They're putting plays on because it's their jobs to put play on, and contrary to everything we're taught in the UK, if you do well in Elizabethan theatre, it's sort of Hollywood. It's that sort of money. You can make fortunes. And Shakespeare dies a very, very wealthy man. The Globe took 3,000 people. London in 1600, a city fewer than 200,000 people. So obviously, as you said, you've got to get the audience coming back. So how long do they rehearse for? This is, I think, the first and most interesting question. Is any ideas? Do you know this? How long do they rehearse? New play, hot off the quill, Romeo and Juliet. How long do they rehearse for?
I heard they, from what I've read, they turned them around in like a couple of days or a week.
Couple of days or a week. I love the way you added a week to that, just because you thought a couple of days sounded silly. And actually you went the wrong way. And the clue is in the repertoire. They perform at 2 o'clock in the afternoon because it's an outdoor theatre with no lights. If you perform at night, no one sees anything. And every afternoon you do a different play. Well, if you do a different play every afternoon, when do you rehearse? The answer is you rehearse in the morning. That's it. So you've got a theatre with no lights, you've got the morning to rehearse, and obviously you're doing a different play every afternoon because you've got to get the audience coming back, and they're not going to come and see Romeo and Juliet 3 times in a row, however much you like it. Anyway, so let's not get started on Romeo and Juliet. So you do a different play every afternoon, so you get the morning to rehearse. What time will you start? Theatre with no lights. What time are you going to start rehearsals? Dawn, absolutely. Except they're actors. Actors don't do dawn. No, they start as we start for the same reason. They start at 10. So it gives you from 10 o'clock till 2 o'clock to do your play, rehearse your play, except they're actors. What have I forgotten? What do you do? Yeah, very good, you won't too many actors. Lunch, yeah, absolutely. There's a contract for a boy actor of the period, and it tells start at 10, lunch at 1, show at 2. So that gives you 3 hours to rehearse your 3-hour play. Well, if you think about Romeo and Juliet, the scene where they meet's a masked ball, everyone's wearing face masks and dancing, I would have thought you want to rehearse that. Otherwise, the wrong people talk to the wrong people, fall in love with the wrong people. And you wind up with a tragedy called, Romeo and Lady Capulet, and you have a disaster on your hands. And to that, you have 4 sword fight scenes, 2 of which are crowd sword fight scenes. Well, I don't want to share a stage with 14 other heavily armed people who don't know what they're doing. So I think you'd want to rehearse that. So you're going to rehearse a 3-hour play in 3 hours. You're not going to rehearse much, if any, of the rest of the play. And so the first thing to think about, and I think get kids up and doing, is how you're going to do that. But, and this is where they get really excited, the thing you have to think about, and I'm probably going to set that off, but I'm sorry, is what you're learning your play from. Because if we're doing Romeo and Juliet now, I would give you all a copy of Romeo and Juliet, the Folger edition, or the RSC edition, or the Arden edition, or whatever. And you'd work from that. Obviously, they have printing in Shakespeare's time. Half of the plays, what we call the quartos, are printed for the company. But they're not printed in his lifetime, but they're not printed for the company. They're printed, once everybody in London knows everyone's dead at the end of Romeo and Juliet, the last bit of money you can make out of it is by selling it to a bookseller who prints it up, sells it on. So the company work from a handwritten script. Now this is Mercutio in Romeo and Juliet. If you're playing Mercutio in Romeo and Juliet, that's what you get of the play. Instead of a helpful little paperback, you get that. And it's interesting because, just a scroll. And some of you will know this. What do you get? Whole play? Clearly not. You just get your lines. You get your lines and cue, what we brilliantly call a cue script. Obviously, it's money, as always. You don't want to pay to someone to write out Hamlet 16 times by hand, not knowing if you're only going to perform it once. There are several plays, that, according to the records of the Rose, they only do once and then they never do again. Huge hits you may do 10 times in a year and a half. So, you know, the turnover is dramatic. So if you're playing Mercutio, that is what you get on Romeo and Juliet. Instead of a helpful little paperback, you get that. As you can see, I have not written it out by hand. 8.5 pages. Mercutio is a great part, agreed, but of course he dies halfway through. So by definition, it's not a big part. On this format, Romeo is 16 pages. Second quarto, Hamlet, is 34. You can get the scroll for Hamlet and do that, and it's sort of somewhere the other side of Arizona before it's finished unrolling. And you're given it like this in the form of a scroll, so that if you're playing more than one part, you can stick them together, because you probably are. Cymbeline requires a cast of about 60. We think they had 16 or 18 actors. You can do the math. And you're given it like that in the form of a scroll, and some of you will know this, but kids love this. What's that? He's from England, don't trust him. What am I doing to this piece of paper? I'm rolling it up. What's that? It's a roll. It's the role of Mercutio. It's your role in the play. Do you have a big role? No, I die. No one ever believes this. A wave of cynicism is crossing all your faces. It's Shakespeare. That's far too easy. It must be from Latin. If you roll up a piece of paper, it's a roll. If it's not the whole play, what is it? What's a whole made up of? Parts. What part are you playing? I'm playing that part. So where all these words come from. It comes back to, we've made Shakespeare difficult. To get into the Globe in 1599, you put a penny in a box, and then you pay someone called a gatherer if you want to sit, and depending on how much you pay, it depends where you sit. But to get into the theatre, you just put a penny in a box. Where are you going to keep the box? Where are you going to keep the box? I keep it in an office, yes, and I'd then call it the box office. That was lovely watching your face go, oh my God, that's where that goes. I love all this stuff. And you can see it better on this. If you're playing the part of the first merchant in the Comedy of Errors, that is all you get of the Comedy of Errors. Instead of a helpful little paperback, you get this. And I'll bring this around so you can see it, even though I'm going off camera. So you get your own lines and a cue. Now, we would, I think, normally define a cue as the line before yours that tells you when to speak, but it's not, because that would take too long, cost too much, etc., 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 to write out. So you get the, I'm not going to come any closer, because if I get near to that mic, we'll get feedback. You get the last 3 words. Don't worry, you're going to have bitter and personal, up-close experience of this in about 2 minutes. So that's my cue to come on. That's my first speech. My first speech ends with a line, there is your money that I had to keep. And my next cue is dine with me. And when I hear dine with me, I say that. What do I not know about the 3 words dine with me? Who says them? Who they say them to? I have no reason to assume they will say them to me. I think more importantly than even those 2 rather important things, what happens in that gap? You have no idea. So I don't know whether I say to you, there is your money that I had to keep, and you say, thanks, will you dine with me? Or if I say to you, there is your money that I had to keep, and you say, ha, 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 to be or not to be, that is the question, whether it is noble and man's and have a 75-line speech that ends in the 3 words, dine with me. Nor indeed if I say my line to you, who talks to her, who talks to him, who talks to him, who talks to her, and there's a battle, and then you talk to, and you say dine with me in 45 minutes time to me. So this is how it works. You're a 40-foot by 20-foot stage in front of 3,000 people doing a different play every afternoon, which you get a few days to learn and about 3 hours to rehearse, is that sooner or later someone is going to say something to somebody that's going to end in the 3 words, dine with me, at which point it's your turn to talk. This is not how modern actors work. And when I say you can't understand Shakespeare till you understand this, it didn't really make the flight, this piece of paper, did it? You can't understand Shakespeare. Most obvious point, not the most interesting, but the most obvious. He can't use the 3 words, dine with me, in that order at any point between there and there, because if he does, I will start talking. You see that? Imagine it's Romeo and Juliet, and they're down the front doing the falling in love stuff. You know, if I profane with my unworthiest hand. And the audience, you know, go, oh, it's wonderful, they're falling in love. And Romeo says to Juliet, I love you so much, I'd like you to come and dine with me. At which point the back door in the stage bursts open and the first merchant's barreling down. I've heard dine with me, I'm talking. So, as you're here, and as you may notice I've cleared a little area, I think we should see how easy this is. Now, 120 copies of this, the Great Hearts are printed off. I need 4 volunteers. Yeah, 1, 2, 3, 4. Lovely, thank you very much indeed. Come on up. And I'll give you yours in a moment, but those of you who didn't volunteer, I don't think you get out of this. Yes. Gentlemen at the back. Little did you think when you hired that you were going to end up doing Shakespeare. So you are no longer a group of symposiasts, or whatever the plural would be. You are now an angry Roman mob. This is fairly obviously from Julius Caesar. These are the leaders of said angry Roman mob. Julius Caesar's just been assassinated. You're pretty cross about it. I'm playing Mark Antony. I'm trying to make you crosser. And if you look at your script, it's very easy. It goes ... and there are 3 words in italics. Those words in italics are your cue. When you hear your cue, you say your line. It's that easy, okay? Ready? Here we go. I tell you that which you yourselves do know. Show you sweet Caesar's wounds, poor dumb mouths, and bid them speak for me. But were I Brutus, and Brutus Antony, there were an Antony would ruffle up your spirits and put a tongue in every wound of Caesar that should move the stones of Rome to rise and mutiny.
We'll mutiny.
We'll burn the house of Brutus.
Away then, come seek the conspirators.
Yet hear me, countrymen, yet hear me speak.
Peace ho, here, Antony.
Most noble Antony.
Textbook. Where friends you go to do you know not what. Wherein has Caesar thus deserved your loves? Alas, you know not, I must tell you then. You forgot the will I told you of.
Most true, the will. Let's stay and hear the will.
Here is the will, and under Caesar's seal to every Roman citizen he gives, to every several man, 75 drachmas.
Most noble Caesar will revenge his death.
Oh, royal Caesar.
Hear me with patience.
Peace ho.
Moreover, he's left you all his walks, his private arbors, his new planted orchards on this side Tiber. Left them you and your heirs forever. Common pleasures to walk abroad and recreate yourselves. Here was a Caesar, when comes such another.
Never, never. Come, away, away. We'll burn his body in the holy place, and with the brands fire the traitors' houses. Take up the body. Go fetch fire.
Pluck down benches.
Pluck down forms, windows, anything.
Very good, the 4 of you. Well done. Now imagine playing Hamlet. And it works great in a classroom, this, because it's just one of those things. The kids just love it. Will mutiny. Yeah, we're in. Interesting. First plebeian. Lady there. First line. First cue, rise and mutiny. First line, will mutiny, will burn the house of Brutus. What did you not know?
That other people are going to speak with me in the first part of the line, but not the whole thing.
Excellent. Text. Perfect. Yeah, exactly right. You didn't know that everyone else was going to say will mutiny, nor did you know that they were only going to say will mutiny. And you did what everyone always does, which is go, okay, this doesn't sound too difficult. Here we go, rise and mutiny. Will mutiny. Everyone else is talking. Everyone else has stopped talking, and you came in very tentatively, we'll burn the house of Brutus. Like, and the point I'm getting at with this, and you know, I'm trying to squeeze into a 45-minute session. It was about a week and a half of work. Obviously, it means you're listening. It's an exercise in listening. Obviously, it means you're listening not just for your cue, because that was good what you did there, but it was so you got the lines in the right order. Well, brilliant. It means, obviously, that Shakespeare has to make this. You don't have rehearsal. So how do you make it drama? How do you make the audience want to come back tomorrow? Well, the only way you can do it is by how you write it. And if you know what you're looking for in a Shakespeare script, I'm out of a job. You don't need a director. You've got one. He just happened to die in April 1616. Because Shakespeare directs it by how he writes it. Now, you can take this from the incredibly prosaic and not very interesting, like embedded stage direction. If Shakespeare tends to have, am I doing a workshop on this? Yes, I think I Oh, yes, I am, tomorrow with Jonathan Pate. Shakespeare tends to have stage directions spoken because that way it will happen. Stand up, sit down, bring my book to me here in the orchard, lie in my tent and sleep, die, helpful hints like that. If Romeo puts a sword into you and says, die, unless your next line is, no, you die, it's a pretty safe bet to hit the deck, So you've got that. You've got description of you, and this is a fun one. Just come on quickly, come and volunteer for me. Friar Lawrence in Romeo and Juliet. Remember, you only get your own lines. None of this is in his script. So we walk on stage, and you don't know what I'm going to say. I agree, you look absolutely terrified. It's marvelous. Here is a friar that trembles, sighs, and weeps. Very good, very good. The point being, of course, that Lawrence doesn't know that Lawrence is trembling or sighing or weeping until I tell him. So in the time it takes 3,000 people to stop looking at you and look at you, you've got to be trembling and sighing and weeping. Otherwise, waving to your friends in the audience. You're going to be out of a job by 3 o'clock. And it really is about listening and listening out for Shakespeare's clues. And it's, I'm going over this so fast, but it's the fun stuff is working out how he wants you to do it and how he's directing it. And obviously, you can do Here is a Friar that trembles, sighs, and weeps. Lady Beatrice, have you wept all this while? Yes. How now, Horatio, you tremble and look pale. Okay. This is how fast they're working. But the other work they have to do, and this is probably slightly advanced level for students, is thinking about the way he's directing it by how he writes it. Because it's things like, why am I speaking prose, not verse? Why am I speaking verse, not prose? Why do I choose this moment to change from the one to the other? If I've got verse, where do my sentences end? Middle of a line, end of a line, why? Why do I have this number of syllables in a line, not that number? It all matters. Any of you who were here last year, Frederick Turner did the first keynote and was talking, just brilliantly about art and science. And my favorite bit of doing Shakespeare is the math. And you watch kids going, and you go, yeah, that's how you do it. You're counting syllables. Oh my God, I'm doing it right. Because I want to give you time for questions. So I'll just give you a couple of examples of these. I'm presuming most of you know Twelfth Night. In Twelfth Night, Olivia has taken this vow that she's just going to mourn her dead brother for 7 years. Orsino keeps sending messengers saying, love me, love me, love me. And she keeps sending them back saying, mourning dead brother, push off. Orsino gets a new messenger, this being Shakespeare's boy dressed as a girl and nobody notices. Girl dressed as a boy and nobody notices. Olivia promptly falls in love with the messenger. Okay, if you're playing Olivia, how do you know the moment you fall in love? Well, other writers of the period, and I am not joking, would put in a stage direction bracket, she falls in love. Shakespeare being Shakespeare is rather more subtle. Halfway through the scene, Olivia's language changes. She stops speaking to this boy in prose, and she starts speaking to him in verse. Well, as a general theatrical rule, I say theatrical because this annoys academics enormously, which alone makes it worth the price of admission. Prose comes from here, and iambic pentameter goes, I can do this. Well, so does that, hopefully. If it doesn't, you should see someone. So her language changes from the language of the head, the prosaic, to the language of the heart. Well, that's clue one, I would say, to the actor playing Olivia. Clue two is her first line of verse. She says to this boy, have I just turned that off? She says to this boy, your Lord does know my mind, I cannot love him. Simple, huh? Your Lord does know my mind, I cannot love him. Except it's not simple, because an iambic pentameter has 10 syllables, and your Lord does know my mind, I cannot love him has 11. Well, leaving aside for a moment the whole poisoned chalice that is the phrase feminine ending, which is because the last syllable's unstressed and therefore weak, so it's weak like a girl. Someone walked out of my lecture at that point once, at a university that shall remain nameless, but was Syracuse. And obviously Shakespeare doesn't think women are weak because he keeps writing these emotionally superior, emotionally powerful women. And he lives in a patriarchal society run by this guy called Elizabeth. It blows feminine ending theory nicely out of the water, I think. And like everything with Shakespeare, we've given it a title to make it difficult, scare children. How do you make an 11-syllable line into a 10-syllable line? Don't be clever. I've got 11 bananas, I want 10 bananas. What do? Take away a banana. So which syllable should we take away? We'll take away number 11, last in, first out. Your Lord does know my mind, I cannot love. That's what she's been saying throughout the play. I have taken a vow, I am mourning my dead brother for 7 years. Your Lord does know my mind, I cannot love. Your Lord does know my mind, I cannot love. Enter really cute boy. Your Lord does know my mind, I cannot love him. And the hymn tells you everything you need to know about the goalpost shifting. It's not I can't love anymore, it's I can't love Orsina, but who are you? The extra syllable tells you what's happening. What's the most famous line in Shakespeare?
You're not to me. That's the question.
11 syllables. Oops. So either it shows you that Hamlet is weak like a girl, or what does Hamlet need to be? He's this revenge hero. He's a university intellectual, and his dad's come back from the dead, and he's got to turn into a revenge hero. He's got to avenge his dad's death. If you're a revenge hero, and you're looking for justice, you're looking for vengeance, you're looking for blood, what do you go on? What do you go on if you're looking for the Holy Grail? To be or not to be, that is the quest. Perfect iambic pentameter. But Hamlet can't say it. Hamlet has to say, to be or not to be, that is the quest. Ian, if you can't say the word quest without turning it into a question, and you're playing a character that has 65% more questions than any other character in Shakespeare in a play that opens with a question, who's there, I would suggest you have nailed the part of Hamlet. And you know, you can, as indeed I probably have, spend most of your life looking at this stuff and go, oh, that's what he's doing. That's what that is. That's what that's looking at. And it's great because students will always spot something you haven't, which was fascinating to me. They will always go, oh, do you think, oh yeah, and you're going, yeah. I'm, as you can tell, in the middle of directing a course at a drama school in London at the moment. And already in sort of 5 weeks, I've learned a huge amount about some scenes we've been looking at from the histories that I didn't know before. With students going, is that how do you do that? And it's, I would say it's like sort of the Da Vinci Code, but better written. It's a way of looking at these texts as a detective work rather than sort of, I don't know, is Hamlet in love with his mother? Does Iago have an Oedipus complex? You know, let's discuss the iambic pentameter. It's looking at them and going, what's he saying? What's he saying to this actor? What's he want that actor to do? And you can, I mean, I'm as Brown said, I'm on the audition panel at RADA, which is this drama school in London. And I mean, you know, you just watch people get it right. So I was looking at, because they send in tapes. So I was looking at someone's done their take at about this sort of distance, you know, full height. And the line is, then I declare here on my knees that before high heaven and you, and you're like, does the phrase here on my knees not sort of excite your interest in any noticeable way? You know, and you find the jokes and you find what he's doing and how, you know, he plays jokes on his actors by the fact they don't know what's happening, you know, and the fact they don't know what's happening is inherently funny. They charged more for a first performance. And academics will tell you because it's because of the excitement of being at the first night of Hamlet. No, it's not. It's because it's much more chance of it being a car crash. And audiences love car crashes. This is why we still go to live theatre, because it might go wrong. You know, it's why movies put in outtakes at the end, because we love seeing it go wrong, and it doesn't go wrong on film, because you just reshoot it. So you put the outtakes in at the end. And it's just really making these plays accessible. About, you know, it's about money. It's about getting it right, because if you don't get it right, the audience won't come back tomorrow because they'll go to the pub or the bear baiting or a brothel. If you get it right, they'll talk about the 1590s for the next 60 years as being the golden age of theatre. And it just changes the way you look at these texts, because you stop looking at it as something to be studied, and they become something to explore and play around with, and they become plays. And plays are the opposite of works. And I think that's a really, really important point. You've got a few minutes. Questions. Ask me questions. Any question? I've piled through that very, very fast. Look at disbelief on your hand. Oh, you can't.
Okay, this is rather self-indulgent, but I'm so curious. What is your favorite play by Shakespeare to either direct or to watch?
To To direct the answer is probably always the most recent. My favourite Shakespeare play, and I'm alone in the world in this, is Love's Labour's Lost, which most people think should never be performed, and I think is a work of sublime genius. But I wouldn't say it's my favourite play to watch because it's done badly so often. There are just too. It's too hard, really, because they're just all so wonderful. But I do love Love's Labour's Lost. I really do. I mean, I think it's one of the first plays I was in when I was at college. It was one of the first plays I directed, and that will always retain a special place in your heart, I think. So.
There's a couple questions. One is, could you just describe, and I get the picture, I just like to hear your words, like, what's the common approach that killed the love of Shakespeare in when it was taught in the classroom, especially there are works that have that a lot of people love and are reading, and they're reading to their kids. They think, well, we should teach that to everybody, but then there's something that happens when you bring it into the classroom that might just kill it for everybody rather than opening it up. Well, what did can you describe that more?
I think one of the things is the most important thing is not just reading it, but getting up and doing it. Because if you have a classroom of kids, by definition, they're going to be at different levels of reading. And listening to someone fight their way through 25 lines of Hotspur when they really, it just sounds boring. The other problem with it, and this is my theory as a professional director, the reason we find Shakespeare difficult to understand, and the reason kids find Shakespeare difficult to understand, is because the actors don't understand it themselves. I mean, I went to a production recently at a theatre company not a million miles from here, not actually in Phoenix, and it was just abundantly clear that 50% of the actors didn't know what they were talking about. They sort of know what they're talking about, but that's not good enough. None of us start a sentence going, I sort of think I'm saying this. We know what we're saying. That's what we tend to do. And the problem with listening to a student read when they haven't a clue, and then you get it up and you go, well, what does this mean? And they get it, and especially if they're moving, it gives them some action. But just sitting there listening to someone dum, I think is lethal. And also, I think telling them that it's good for them is always a terrible mistake as well. When I was an actor at the National, we were doing Romeo and Juliet, and we went to do a schools outreach thing. And as we were going in, the teacher said, just to make absolutely certain, you won't be mentioning anything about, the fact that it's clear that Romeo and Juliet never actually sleep together, that it's purely platonic. And you think, well, apart from the fact they wake up in bed together and they've just got married, so what are we going to do about that? How to really grip a group of adolescent 15-year-olds. This is a love story that doesn't involve any form of physical contact. Then I'm out. It's like, and I just give them the interesting stuff. I think, save the winter's tale for later. It's why we start them on Dream, Midsummer, and Romeo and Juliet, because you've got some form of contact, as long as Romeo and Juliet have some form of contact. So that would be my answer to that. And you had a second question.
Just about memorizing. So how long do they get the roles
We don't
ahead of
quite
time?
know the answer to that.
Did they have a phenomenal memory, or is that pretty common with actors?
I think the general consensus, and I don't know whether we're looking at the repertoire, is that Burbage, who's the principal actor in Shakespeare's company, must have known at least 20 roles at any given time. I mean, just terrifies us. I've done 6, and actually it's not hard, because it's a muscle memory. I used to do an exercise with actors. If I had a 2-month course, I'd set them a sonnet to learn a week. And the first week, it would probably take them 3 or 4 hours to learn 14 lines, dead letter perfect. After 10 weeks, 8 weeks, you're doing it in 30 minutes. We also, if you're of a certain age, we all know this. I used to know 10 telephone numbers off by heart. I don't know 10 telephone numbers now. I barely know my wife's because memory. You press on them, so you put your smartphone in, and you go Siri, call whatever. So I think it's eminently possible. And there's a thing we do which I no doubt Fred's brother would be able to talk about. Fred Turner's brother would be able to talk about. He's a neurosurgeon. I can remember every single line, pretty much, of every play I've ever been in. I can't remember a single line of any television or film I've ever been in. And you learn in a different way. Because TV, you shoot it, and you never need to know it again. Theatre, you know it, and you're going to know it for the next 6 weeks, 4 weeks. RSC, 2.5 years. You know, I suspect it's a different part of the brain. And you know, you can remember something very quick. I'll just finish with it, because I was so brilliant last year. Fred Turner did this thing about maths and thing. There's something called acoustic presence. And he was talking about this, which is how much you can take in before it has to sort of go into iCloud at the back of the brain. In other words, you can take it immediately and then you have to store it. And he was saying the acoustic presence is apparently 3 seconds. And I'm sitting in his lecture going, because I reckon you can do 20 lines of Shakespeare in a minute if you're good. That means every line of Shakespeare is about 3 seconds, which is exactly why he writes, they all write these 10-syllable lines. And it's why you need, this is my, you know, this is controversial stuff about where you pause and things. But it's why you need to mark the end of the line, because the audience are taking in that 3-second, 10-syllable line, and then they can move on to the next one. If you give them 20 syllables, they're having to store the first 10. And I was just sitting there, you know, something, one of my pet things about Shakespeare is how you do the verse, and this mathematical person, a neurological science maths person, stood up and just absolutely confirmed what you know, something I believe in very, very strongly from a scientific point of view. I found that fascinating. And I think, is that nearly quarter? How are we doing? We're done. We're done? 12:15. 12:15. Thank you very much indeed.
The first question is, if we want to learn more about what you presented and you and your work, where can we go?
To my classes tomorrow, for 9:30 and 2:30. I think would be your first point of work.
Do you have a website? Do you have books on this topic?
I have a website. I don't have a book on this subject because it's very depressing. I was about to start writing one, and Professor Newstock at Rhodes, just before the pandemic, lent me this book. He said, you might be interested in this. Thanks, Barry Edelstein at the Old Globe, who'd just completely written the book I want to write. If you want to know more about it, read Barry Edelstein's Thinking Shakespeare. It's annoyingly brilliant and deeply frustrating. And I do have a website, nickhutchison.com, which I hope is rather more up to date than that thing you've got. But yeah, but the Barry Edelstein book is very, very good. Or Peter Hall's Shakespeare Advice to the Players is also very good. He was my hero.
That was
Peter Hall. He used to be he was the first artistic director of the RSC and the first artistic director of the National in London. And sadly now dead, but a genius on how this stuff works. And it's a really short, really thin, really user-friendly book. And just Shakespeare's Advice to the Players. Again, a brilliant title, damn. So, I wanted to write Shakespeare's Advice to the Players by Barry Edelstein, but it seems to have sort of been done, frankly. So, very good. Thank you very much indeed. And come to the other things, sessions.